everyone. Thanks for tuning in to this special edition of Influences Podcast. I'm your host today, Tatiana Haraschuk, and in this episode, I'll be interviewing my dad, Jason Haraschuk. Jason, or as I call him, Dad, is a father of two, husband to my mom, a Catholic high school English and ESL teacher, a DJ, a former radio broadcaster, a counselor, and an advocate for the OECTA/DPSU Teachers Union, as well as a podcaster who hosts, produces, and promotes this show, Influences Podcast. Dad, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Tachana. Thanks for having me on my own program. It's great to be in the other seat for once to answer the question. So thank you as well for being our guest host for the podcast. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me. I'm so excited.
Awesome.
Okay, so first off, why did you create Influences Podcast?
So it's an interesting story, Tachana, on how and why I created Influences Podcast. A little while ago, maybe we're talking about 2023, I reunited with some really good friends from radio school, and I went to Humber College and I graduated from radio broadcasting there. I did a postgraduate certificate and had a reunion with those guys and found out that instead of radio, a lot of them are now doing podcasts. And yeah, and I've always wanted to do a podcast. I tried a podcast with another friend of mine in the past. And I mean, we did a couple of episodes, but after that, it wasn't really his thing. And so I dropped it after a while. So I was talking to these guys about the podcast idea, and they really encouraged me. A guy named Ben Grant, who is on a program called X's and Argos. Another guy I had during season one, Josh Ball, was a really big advocate of that, and Fabio Fernandez, who is part of the Resting Well Being podcast, and yeah, and also Melissa Geramonti as well, who also does a podcast when it comes to I think her podcast is about females in the film industry.
Really? That's
Yeah,
so cool.
in the TV industry. And all of them are like, man, you got to do this. You got to get back into it again and get back into it and do it. So I thought about it and I wanted to do something totally unrelated to my profession. Well, maybe not totally unrelated, but primarily unrelated. And I love electronic music. I love, as you well know, I love house music. I love electronic bands like Depeche Mode, The Cure. Well, The Cure's more rock band, but they do have their synthesizers as well.
Yes.
And I felt, you know what? Let's do this podcast and I'll just call it Influences Podcast, because influences, to me, that's the electronic music has really influenced me along the way. And I'm really glad for that because it shaped me for who I am today as an individual.
I love that answer. That's a great one.
Thanks.
Yeah, I didn't know some of that. That's interesting.
So you're learning something about
Yes,
me
I
too,
am.
not just the audience over there, right?
What qualifies you to create and run a podcast like Influences Podcast? Take us through the journey.
So this journey, like I said, started in 2023. Um, and I thought about at first doing an interview program and then doing a DJ bit because I love DJing as well, doing a DJ bit for half of that program. But it turned out that it didn't really work out.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I decided to do was just an interview show. So what I did was I found a bunch of people online and also just through people I've known in the past, like my producer now, Angela Churchill, is an old friend of mine from high school. Josh Ball, who I mentioned earlier, is a friend of mine from radio school, and they were both on the program. And then another person that's become a really good friend and also my social media consultant, Christina Laukinen, who goes by the name of My Girl Tuesday, somebody I met online just through Instagram and that's so it pretty well developed from the interviews to finding some people to work on the show. And then it took a while to get the first season going.
Mhm.
I managed to secure an interview with the one of the pioneers of house music, Mark Farina, which was a huge highlight for me.
Yes, that's so cool.
Yeah, because he's my Olivia Rodrigo of the house music scene. So yeah, he was that was a big deal. And and yeah, and I got an interview with him, but I also got to meet and interview a lot of other cool DJs who I wouldn't normally meet, just out and about. So it was great reconnecting with that community. And the podcast, it took about 6 to 8 months to get all the interviews. I had to take a little break because of some, the day job and what I do during my day job, taking care of you guys and, family stuff happened. And so, what happened in the end was, and I got to give another shout out to my buddy Josh because, come 2024, um, he kind of issued me a challenge. He's like, "So, man, when's the podcast coming out?" And I'm like, "Soon, soon." And he's like, "Well, come on, let's get it going." He's like, "Why don't you just put in an hour a day into the podcast?" And, you never know what'll happen. If you only, let's say, upload the video and do a couple of cuts, hey, that's an hour. So because of that, I took it one step further. And what I did was, I issued a 1 hour a day hashtag 1 hour a day challenge on Instagram. So to keep myself accountable, I kept posting my progress. I tried to get an interview done a day or an interview done a week. I can't remember how it went. But if you go back to my Instagram, influences underscore podcast on Instagram,
Check it
y-
out.
check it out. Yeah, you'll see how that went. And it was a really interesting journey. And because of that, I got the show together. But along the way, I picked up Angela as my, she wanted a hobby to do,
Mhm.
so she agreed to be my producer. So I produced the show along with her. And then Christina kind of just fell into the social consultant role because she was trying to tell me all these nifty things you can do on social media to help promote myself in the industry. So
Well,
that's the journey that took. And my first episode dropped on October 1st, 2024, and it just wrapped up on January 7th with the Mark Farina interview. So I thought it went really well. And yeah, I thank all my guests, thank all my crew, and thank you as well for all of that
oh,
that happened, making that happen.
yes, you're welcome. Two of your guests on the program actually became part of the podcast as your producer and social media consultant. Kind of already answered that question,
I
but
did. So, like I said, Angela Churchill, who goes by the name of Purple Sapphire, she's also an electronic music producer. She's been a fantastic help and kind of actually also was a great motivator because the reason why we're doing this right now, right after you come from school, is because I have to send this to her and make sure she edits it because I really want to try to get this out by the 14th of January. So let's see
yes,
let's see what happens.
TBD.
So she's been great. I've known her for 30 years at least. She was a friend from high school. So my girl Tuesday or Christina was somebody I met just through socials, and she's a mom, two boys, and she's also a DJ, and she's been really successful and really good at social media. So she's been helping me along with that and became part of the team as well.
Nice. That shout out to them. How did you get or think of your DJ name, J Wright?
So yeah, so that's something I haven't talked about a lot on the show. So my actual DJ name is Jay Wright, and my
Yes.
wife over here made a stencil for me regarding Jay Wright. I can't remember if it was for my 40th birthday or one of the birthdays in my 40s. But my friends in radio school always used to tease me on how I used to say right, all the time. Like, I'd be like, somebody would say something maybe, and instead of saying, "Oh yeah," I'd say, "Right, right." So they used to tease me a bit about that, and most of my friends call me Jay.
Yeah.
So then I just mixed the two together, and Jay Wright was the DJ name.
Nice. That's very original.
Thank you.
Do you see yourself doing something else dealing with the podcast, or are you just sticking to interviews? Why or why not?
So that's a great question. I am seeing myself maybe just incorporating new things, like for example, what we're doing here, right? So this is actually my first live interview, and maybe you're the guest interviewer, I'm the interviewee, and we're actually doing this live. So it'd be interesting to do another one like this live.
Yes.
Um, so that's one idea. Another idea I had was interviewing a DJ during their set, you
Oh,
know.
that's cool.
So I thought maybe doing that as well would be pretty cool idea.
Hmm.
And just like simple things like, instead of I have the split screen during season one, so you have me on one side
Yeah.
and you have my guest on the other side. So maybe just doing speaker view. So for example, I'm talking, you see the whole picture, and then my guest on the other side talks because I do most of my interviews virtually,
Yeah.
just for convenience sake. So those are some of the things in the works for what I'm thinking of doing with the
Yeah.
podcast.
I'd love to see that happen. That sounds so cool. Okay. Who are your influences in electronic music? How did these influences inspire you to do this show? Like a
So
DJ?
I think you could pretty well answer that question. Who's my number one electronic music interest, you think there, Tatiana?
Mark Farina?
Well, Mark Farina is my number one DJ. But what about that other
Oh!
band?
Depeche
It's
Mode.
right up there,
Depeche
Depeche
Mode.
Mode, right? So Depeche Mode, is the quintessential electronic DJ. Well, they're not DJs, actually. That's not entirely true because both Martin Gore and Andy Fletcher of that band did do some DJing, but we know them for their electronic music. And I got into them. I remember the first time I heard "People Are People," which is one of their quintessential songs. I was probably about your age, maybe a little younger. I kept that pretty quiet when I was a kid because it wasn't cool to listen to Depeche Mode in my elementary school. You have to listen to Motley Crue, Judas Priest, all these heavy metal bands. So
No
only
idea.
only the girls listen to Depeche Mode and Duran Duran. But I honestly love those bands. So coming into high school, I kind of, went out and just started really listening to Depeche Mode. And even some of my high school friends today remember all my Depeche Mode T-shirts, and
Still
they're
wear them.
still wear them. so, 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 so the Depeche. So I mean, that's one band. Like, I hope you have this. You reflect back on a band that you listened to. I remember listening to parts of their first album that I bought, Music for the Masses, in 1987, and being up at my parents' cottage, Bob and Diedel's cottage, and listening to that album up in the attic, you know.
Oh, the attic.
Yeah, the attic, the attic. It was dark. It was the perfect setting because Depeche Mode deals with a lot of dark themes, right? So, and then Violator came out in 1990, first time I went to go see him. So there's a lot of good memories that are associated with Depeche Mode. So
Love that.
number one influence was them. And you mentioned Mark Farina. He is my favorite DJ. So he really influenced me when it came to house music. But I can't mention Mark without mentioning my own brother, Mike Haraschuk, who got me into house music back in probably my late teens or 20s, because he really got me into guys like Mark Farina, Derek Carter, Green Velvet,
Did
you
not
know.
know Uncle Mike likes those people.
Yeah, Uncle Mike was really into that scene as well, and not so much anymore, but he got me into it too, so that was a huge influence as well.
Nice, nice. Love that. Through this show, how do you feel that you have influenced the genre of electronic music?
So I hope that through Influences podcast, I've given a platform for people who don't necessarily are starting out in the business and don't necessarily have a platform to talk about why they do what they do. So I think I'm an influence that way. I'm also a high school teacher, so stuff like this. I hope I run a DJ club at the high school that I teach at, and I'm hoping my students in that club would find solace in doing something like Influences podcast.
Who knows? Maybe
I'm
they will.
I'm hoping somebody like you, maybe like my daughter and Katie,
Yeah.
would be interested in doing something like this as well. Having a platform for those people. And also, the one thing that I find great about doing a show like Influences Podcast is how great people can be. Like I said, guys like Mark Farina, and I'm talking to other well-known DJs for season 2 that may or may not come on the program, but the fact that they're even interacting with me is something that's really, really nice. And the fact that, a guy like Mark giving back to a guy who just starts off, takes the faith in me, gives back that way. I think that's really good for the viewership and the listenership as well.
It is. Is. Last question. Will there be a season 2 or are you done after this one?
There will be a season 2, Tatiana.
Uh,
There will be a season 2 of Influences podcast.
Really? It's
Yeah,
exciting. It's
yeah,
exciting.
yeah. I got a lot. I've already done a few interviews, so it's going to be an exciting season. Tune in for that later on.
Yes.
Hopefully in 2025. That's what I'm gunning for this year, sometime later in the year. So, until then, still check out the socials. Influences underscore podcast on TikTok, Instagram. You could also catch me, Jason Haraschuk, on Facebook. And yeah, thanks for doing this,
You're
Tatiana.
welcome. Thank you again for having me.
Yeah, so that's Tatiana Haraschuk, my daughter, guest host of the end of season 1 for Influences Podcast. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
You have been watching and listening to Influences Podcast. Influences Podcast is written, produced, and hosted by yours truly, Jason Haraschuk. Also produced by Angela Churchill, aka Purple Sapphire. My social media consultant is Christina Laukinen, also known as My Girl Tuesday. Check out Influences Podcast on Instagram and TikTok at influences_podcast. That's influences_podcast. Thanks for watching and listening.